You guys are going to enjoy our next speaker. Before I bring him on, I just want to share a little bit about him. So Tim Kellis, he's a renowned Wall Street analyst who takes on what's considered to be society's biggest problem today, divorce. The journey that led him to tackling such a significant issue was both personal and professional. After a successful career that eventually landed him on Wall Street, Tim met who he thought was the girl of his dreams, only to see the relationship end with bitterness and anger. Now he helps other couples through the same journey with love and forgiveness. And there he is. Hello, Tim. How are you?
Good evening, Janelle. I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Good. I know it's late where you are. It's like 9:30, right?
It's fine. It's still early. It's 9:30.
Yeah, good. The party's just starting. What are you talking
The
about?
party's just starting, exactly. And we're having a cold spell down here in South Florida. It's in the 70s, so it's really chilly outside.
Life is hard.
Yeah, this is the time of the year to be living in South Florida, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally. Well, so your talk is called The Logical Marriage Solution. And I remember talking to you and saying, what is it you want to talk about? What's the title of your session? And you told me this, and I was like, oh, at first I thought, okay, well, that's really simple. And at the same time, I was like, this is really interesting. The Logical Marriage Solution. So tell me a little bit about, why you chose this title and why is it so important to you that you share this with other guys and women?
Well, I have solved the marriage problem. And
awesome.
That's really the bottom line with my conversation is I've solved the marriage problem. And it sounds unusual because people haven't heard that before. But in fact, at the end of the day, what you realize is it's about time that somebody comes up with a marriage solution. But I teach people how to create a lifelong marriage, basically. And at the end of the day, it's about conflict resolution.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, obviously you're seeing a lot of couples coming in and dealing with, the decision whether or not they want to stay together. I'm guessing is, they're coming to see you right before they make that sort of final decision. What would you say are the top, 3 to 5 common challenges or like situations that you see people coming to? And secondly, what are those like the common mistakes that you see that couples are making?
Well, the bottom line is if you were to ask the majority of couples that are not doing well what the problem is, or if you were able to figure out what the problem is, it's one or both are trying to control the marriage. And in fact, when I say I've solved the marriage problem, the title of my book is Equality. And as we know, if you think about it, one of the things that an engineer is taught to do is they're taught to look at what has changed to cause the problem. And before the 60s, our divorce rate was single digits. And so what changed in the 60s, obviously, is the education of women. So before the 60s, the man was in charge. Read the first page of the Bible, and it basically says that the wife will obey the husband. And because of the education of women and subsequent employment of women, for the first time in history, they were able to go and support themselves financially. And so what the problem that's happened is we've not figured out yet how to create this new marriage, which is a marriage based on equality, which is different than the old patriarchy marriage. And so that's really the problem that I help couples figure out. But when you get into what the problems are, quite frankly, in fact, Martin Luther King was once asked what he thought was the problem in marriage. And his humble response was, oh, I don't know. I think they don't know each other very well and are afraid. And that's really what causes problems in marriages is fear from something that you've had happen to you in your past. In fact, when you understand the notion of development, you realize that the younger you are, the less developed you are. And so who's your biggest influence when you're the youngest? Your parents. So it turns out the biggest key to whether a marriage is going to be successful or not is the relationship with the parents.
That's a really great point. I totally agree in that. I was saying to I can't remember, and I don't think it was the last speaker, but the speaker before him, when I look at my husband and I, we have a fantastic marriage, but we got to grow up with parents who were affectionate, who were respectful, who were, a team. And so, the expectations that we've created out of that, witnessing that, is now correlated and also aligned with what we wanted to create with each other. And I'm clear that that is not the norm. I'm clear that that
Right.
is, especially as, I read a study that, since COVID, that divorce rates have gone up 34%.
Mhm.
And, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think people don't think about that, is it possible that the problems that we're having has perhaps nothing even to do with us? It was just kind of what we were like, how we were raised, and the values and the decisions that we make about, relationships, that, marriage is hard, or that, after a few years marriage becomes boring. And, there's these rules that we create that perhaps we don't even share with our partner. And now we have different expectations based on our past and our upbringing.
Well, and that's exactly the point. Imagine, if you want to think about it from the flip side of what you just said, imagine if your parents got divorced and what that would mean from your mental perspective on your own marriage. And unfortunately, in relationships, whatever you fear actually ends up happening. So if you go into a marriage afraid of getting divorced, so much so that with any problem that you're able to try and find and try to control, you're going to end up getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what happens. And this is why when we get into conflict resolution, one of the things that I do with people when I work with them is I break down arguments into their component parts. And basically what happens, there's a process that the mind goes through that starts off with an insecurity, which is, again, your parents got divorced and now you're afraid of you getting divorced. So you've got this insecurity that you bring into the marriage. It's called baggage, okay, or what Carl Jung calls shadows. And what happens is that insecurity now results in a prejudice. I call them relationship prejudices. Okay. And what's great about the concept of prejudice is we have so many examples in the public arena that we could learn from. Because as it turns out, contrary to what the psychology industry learns because of Freud, our mental problems are not biologically based. That's a big problem. And that's still the foundation of the psychology industry today. As it turns out, our mental problems are actually prejudices. A negative experience from the past that we're afraid of happening again. So it gives us this anxiety on what we have in today's world based on what we've had happen to us in our past. That's a prejudice. It's a preconceived opinion. And that prejudice then leads to being judgmental, which then leads to anger. And so what I was able to do, and this took me years to figure this out, and in fact, when I figured that out, I laughed at myself at its simplicity. But when you understand the correlation between fear and anger, so you come home late from work and your husband gets mad at you and you didn't do anything wrong, you just had a last call, but you still got in trouble. One of the things that I struggle with that led to this answer is when you're not doing anything wrong and you still get in trouble, how are you supposed to deal with that? And when what's happening is it's not something you did exactly, it's very intuitive for you to be able to catch what I just said. In fact, one of my favorite books is called There's No One to Blame. And the point is when you come home late and your husband gets mad at you and you weren't doing anything wrong, it's not something that you did. It's a fear that they have from their past that they're afraid of happening to you. And if you are only to learn, this is what I teach couples to learn to do, is when you come home late from work and your husband gets mad at you, and if you can neutralize your fight or flight instinct, which is unfortunately how most, if you think about it, you come home late for work, you get in trouble, you're defending yourself. Yeah, I didn't do anything, and then he's defending himself, you're defending yourself, and then it's a disagreement that ultimately leads to an argument that's unresolvable. Once you go from a disagreement to an argument, you're at a point of no return. But if you learn to turn that conversation around to what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And then that gets to the psychological research on why he got angry with you.
Yeah.
You'll figure out it's like abandonment issues or self-esteem issues or something that he was taught from his past. And now you have the path to solving the problem on why you got in trouble from coming home late from work, as opposed to it becoming this issue that becomes unresolvable. You have to solve every problem in your marriage, or else they result in what are called psychological lesions or psychic lesions, which are basically holes in development. You know, intimacy is a problem in your marriage. One of you brings it up, the other one gets angry. Ultimately, you quit talking about it. So guess what happens? Your intimacy conversation or subject withers on the vine. You no longer talk about it. It's uncomfortable, and
It's
you
no
no longer
longer
bring it up.
safe.
Exactly. You're no longer safe to talk about whatever subject it is you can't resolve. That's why you have to solve every problem in your marriage. And then you understand the notion of common sense, which is the foundation of solving every problem. If I could take the subjectivity of the individual out of a conversation, I could solve literally every marriage problem. Not only that, because common sense is such a significant concept that we understand so much and so completely that we actually look at it as a very simple concept. That common sense is actually the foundation for the solution, and the solution's not complicated. Again, you come home late from work, he gets mad at you, and you have a logical conversation. Listen, honey, I'm sorry. I had a phone call. Well, listen, what are we going to do to solve the problem? Arguments are fault finding, and they're emotional, and they're backward looking. Disagreements are logical, and they're forward looking. And as long as you keep that conversation moving forward instead of backwards, but as you know, an argument is who's at fault. Have you ever gotten in trouble for something you did 5 years ago? I mean, you know, we can use some. It's so easy to find problems with people.
Yeah. You know, I love what you said, Tim, about, you know, what are you afraid of? Like, I felt, you know, as you were sharing and kind of walking through it, I could, you know, I was kind of envisioning, there I am, my husband comes up to me and says, where were, you know, what you were saying,
Whatever,
the scenario.
yeah.
And then having that, like, what is exactly that you're afraid of? I felt like that energetic shift to like
Well, that's the
space
point.
of vulnerability.
I can't tell you how many people I've taught that to, and when they've implemented it in their marriage, it stops an argument in its tracks.
Yeah, well, it definitely disrupts that like emotional, you know, runaway train that's like, you know, especially when he or she is just like freaking out, and you're kind of just like, whoa, like what's happening? And like you said, you know, being able to, first of all, disrupt the fight or flight, which is the automatic, you know, defense, you know, and then being able to actually get to a point where you can actually say, you know, what is it exactly you're afraid of? And that person really just getting clear, like, oh wow, I'm so reacting right. Like that's what I noticed in that exercise. That's really great.
But if you think about it logically and keep thinking it through, so you come home late for work, your husband gets mad at you, and you say, what are you afraid of? His first thing's going to be you coming home late for work. He's going to point it at you. And then you just have to learn the next question, which is why. And then eventually, when you ask that question enough times, ultimately, he's got to turn that conversation back onto himself and do his soul searching on what the problem is. Because when you learn this concept, what you ultimately are learning is how couples can grow together, which is what couples are supposed to be doing in order to create a lifelong marriage. Because there's one thing that we all know is true, and that's that we are going to be different in 5 years than we are today. And so then the question is, which direction do you want to take the marriage in? What happens when people get married, or I'm sorry, when people fall in love at the beginning of their relationship, is they create this huge emotional bond towards each other. And the reality is, if you understand how the mind works, you realize that the mind is never stagnant. It's either growing or shrinking. It's never in one place. Yep. And just think about, you start a new career, you know nothing about what you're doing. The more you spend doing it, the better you get, the more knowledgeable you get. And then you quit that career and you start forgetting. That's the way love and feelings work too. Your emotions are either going to grow or shrink. And when you understand that when you argue in your marriage, you are introducing an incredibly debilitating component to your marriage. Because what you're doing, I call it death by 1,000 swords, is you're actually shrinking the bond that was created at the beginning of the relationship. And when somebody tells you, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, that is the moment that the feelings are all gone. We live together, we have kids together, we have a checking account together, we have a logical relationship, but the emotional bond that we created at the beginning is completely evaporated. Because that's the question that I really work to answer is, because this is, as an engineer, makes absolutely no sense. And that is, how do you go from falling in love, deciding both independent of each other that you want to spend the rest of your lives together, to that relationship ending? It is so illogical, makes absolutely no sense until you dive in. And obviously 50% of couples, that's the result. And you realize that what happens to cause that emotional bond to end is arguments, is unresolved conflicts.
I was talking to, I can't remember the speaker. I think you're like my 20th speaker now. Well, no, not 20. You're my 18th or 19th. So I kind of forget. I'm like, where did I have this conversation? But we were talking about divorce and like the rate of divorce. And, you know, one, he said something really interesting. He says, you know, he says, I believe that rates are so high because it's easier to file for divorce than work out your problems. You know, you just go to the lawyer, just say, you know, I want out, sign my papers, pay some money, and then I'm good. Where, you know, it's just so much easier. And people are, you know, let's face it, sometimes they'd rather not deal with it. They just want to kind of hide or avoid and get someone else to clean up the mess.
And let me sorry about this, Janelle, but let me throw a little math at you. You know what a bell curve is?
Yep.
Okay, it's a statistical analysis of a population of people that states that most people are in the middle and fewer people at the end. If we have a 50% divorce rate, that means that the middle of the bell curve, on one side is divorce, and on the other side are people that are married but unhappily. And if you think about it from that perspective, you know, if you think about, like, say 80% of marriages are either divorced or unhappy. Most marriages are not pleasant experiences.
Yeah.
Even if they're still together.
Yeah. I mean, I was interviewing a couple people actually about a month ago, and this woman says, you know, I've been married for 30 years. And I said, congratulations, you know, that's quite the feat. And her face, it was interesting. She kind of did this like, well, you know, it was kind of that. It wasn't like, yes, it was just kind of like, I guess. And I could tell, like, yeah, she didn't say it, but I could see from her face, it wasn't something that she was necessarily proud of. And
I had a guy tell me once, he goes, I just realized I'm in a miserable marriage and there's nothing I can do about it. And it's really sad, because what happens, again, thinking about it from a developmental perspective, I actually have in my book a section on the history of education in this country. And our common school system was actually created 150 years ago. When this country was founded, 90% of men could sign their name and 60% of women could sign their name. In 1900, 30% of the population went to elementary school and 6% graduated from high school. 6% of the population in 1900 graduated from high school. And basically the point about this is, we are now so much more educated. And what that means is we are so much more conscious. In fact, and I think you and I talked about this before, Carl Jung, one of my objectives is to ultimately replace Freud with Jung. And for those of you who don't know who Jung is, he was 19 years younger than Freud. Freud looked up to him so much that he considered him not only his heir apparent, but his son. And let's just say Jung disagreed with Freud's sexuality theory. And Jung went much further than Freud did in figuring out how the mind works. He actually cured schizophrenics and couldn't tell anybody about it because of the conventional wisdom at the time that schizophrenia was a mental disease, and it's not changed in 100 years. we still think mind problems are diseases, which they're not, but that's what the psychology industry teaches us. And Carl Jung, one of the things that he talks about, which is so very profound, he calls it the age of individuation. And what he means by that is we used to be defined by the society we lived in, the church we belonged to, the town we grew up in. We used to be defined by the group we belonged to, some stereotype or some generic group that we could identify with. And the challenges that we're having today, and one of my objectives is to teach people what this means, is the challenges we're having today is how do we learn to live with ourselves? A balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. That is the big question that we've been trying to figure out for literally thousands of years. But now that we're more educated and more conscious and more logical, now is the time for us to realize how we are supposed to live with ourselves. And the way that we're supposed to live with ourselves is not by relying on other people to define us. If you have to have somebody else to define who you are, you do not have a balanced ego. And the reason why you have to have a balanced ego, we all know that in order to be happy in a marriage, you have to be happy with yourself first. Because if not, you're expecting your partner to make up for that, and that's where all the problems come from.
Yeah.
You have to be happy with yourself if you want to be in a successful marriage. It's that simple.
Yeah. And I can see for a lot of people that might be not as simple or as black and white. Oh, I've got getting some feedback.
From me?
I don't know, just all of a sudden it just got really loud. Really interesting.
Okay.
Anyway,
well, I don't hear anything.
No. Oh, interesting. Okay. Sorry. Just got really distracted by that. I can't even remember what I was saying. I got so distracted. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So can you give us maybe, 3 tips or advice that you can give to couples who are, really struggling? I know you shared some really great tips earlier about, really being able to sort of disrupt when that upset is happening and getting curious about what is really upsetting the partner. What else can you offer us?
The most important thing that I teach couples, and throughout my workshop, I stress this literally on a regular basis. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, when most people read that line, obviously from the Constitution, they focus on what? The pursuit of happiness line. But what I actually do is I actually elaborate on life and liberty. Life is morality. Every life is sacred. It's taught to us by the church. And when it comes to relationships, morality is empathy, which is understanding your partner's feelings. Equality, on the other hand, is a political concept. I'm sorry, liberty is a political concept. And what it means is equality. And equality, when it comes to relationships, is understanding your partner's thoughts, which is respect. So empathy is morale. Empathy is your partner's feelings. Respect is your partner's thoughts. It was from actually To Kill a Mockingbird. I know many of us, if not most of us, read that when we were a kid. There's one line in that book that changed my life. And the line was, if you want to understand a man, you have to walk in his shoes. And that's so important to understand. The key to a successful marriage is being able to understand your partner's perspective. And here's a simple way that I describe this concept. I no longer get mad at slow drivers because what I realized is that slow drivers are also going someplace. And the point I'm making with that analogy is, if you can extrapolate that concept of somebody else driving, you looking at it from their perspective, to your partner, and when there's conflicts and being able to look at it from your partner's perspective, it really significantly diminishes the anxiety in the conflict. Because the only way that you can solve a conflict is by understanding each other's perspective.
So true.
So empathy and respect are so critical to a successful marriage. And so, the point I'm making, obviously, with that concept is that you've got 2 people that come from 2 completely different backgrounds. And how are 2 people supposed to come together and combine into a partnership, into a single entity, unless they're able to take each other's perspective into consideration. The way I show this in my seminar is I actually show, it's a picture with 4 on one side and 3, they're beams, and it's an optical illusion. And when you look at it from one side, you see 4 beams, and when you look at it from the other side, you see 3 beams. And the question above the picture is, which one is correct? And so the point I'm making, obviously, is that they're both correct. One person sees 4, the other person sees 3. So which is the correct answer? They're both correct. And understanding that is so critical to a successful marriage. You know, people talk differently. You know, there's that, and then just basically conflict resolution in disagreements versus arguments. To argue without the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead. And when you think about that concept, as soon as your conflict goes from a logical disagreement to an emotional argument, you're at a point of no return. So Janelle, you're a jerk. How do you respond to that? How do we solve that when I accuse you and I'm judgmental of you and I throw some negative, emotional, argumentative, trying to, because the reality is an argument is nothing more than a control mechanism. And so when I can't get you to agree to me logically, and I get finally you struck a nerve on me, and I throw this emotional, barrage at you, you're such a jerk. I mean, that is because I can't solve the problem logically. And so now the only outlet that I have is I give up finally, and I say, heck with it. I'm going to go on that emotional level. And once I get there, then you're responding, no, you're a jerk. And then we go into this, elevated pitch, and then we're at a point of no return. You cannot solve an argument.
I love that. And I think that's a really great point, especially when we're talking about women, right? What I'm thinking about when you were saying that is, when I come home and, I'm had a shitty day or something happened, and my husband throws this like, well, why didn't you do this? Or, well, have you, like trying to reason with me and going like, I can feel myself getting more and more agitated. And I'm clear he's trying to help me. And at that moment, what I'm just looking for is for him just to say, oh my gosh, I so get it, honey. I got you had a shitty day. Or that person, I got that person upset you. And just, being on my side, not on the other person's side, right?
You have hit the nail on the head. And here's the way I describe what you just said. In fact, one of the things that I've discovered is that men and women are actually from the same planet. Okay, men and women are not from different planets. That book has caused more damage than anything in the public domain when it comes to marriage, because now it's used as an excuse. He's from a different planet. She's from a different planet. And I was actually having a conversation with a guy about that once. And he looked at me and goes, you know what I learned from that book? When my wife starts complaining, I don't say anything. And it got me thinking exactly what you just said. A woman comes home from work, terrible day. Co-worker got on her nerves. One of her girlfriends got on her nerves. And she comes home and emotes to her husband. What's a man's typical response? Exactly what you just said. Logical. Fix the problem. That is not why a woman is emoting. The reason why women have girlfriends to emote to is because their husband is not emotional. I'm not gay, not that there's anything wrong with it, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said. But one of the things that I realized that I need to work on, because I am a guy and I'm not as good at that, is to be emotional. And unfortunately, because of our culture today. Now, in 1970, less than 1% of all law and medical degrees went to women. By 1990, that number was over half. Women are just as educated as men, and women are actually taught that logic is a good thing. You guys want to learn, you want to be educated, you want to be logical. But the one big hole that's missing in our society today is teaching men to be emotional, and that not being a weakness. Because it's viewed as a weakness if a guy shows his feelings. Good boys or big boys don't cry. We need to change that. Because how is a man supposed to relate to his wife if she's an emotional kind of, wife, if he's not. That's one of the reasons why communication breaks down, because logic and emotions are two completely different conversations, as you just said.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that we're bringing this up, because this is why there's breakdown, and it makes me sad that couples, break up for things that, if they're, just because of a lack of skill or a lack of perception
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on there, or it's the ego, right? It's the,
Of course it is.
I want to be right, you're wrong, I'm right. And that obsession with dominating each other, when really, I've been married twice, and I'm in this amazing relationship now. And when I look back at I call it my practice marriage, all the things that we did wrong, we were always just trying to one up each other. And it never ends well. Yeah, you win. Yay. Now you've got a wife who doesn't want to have sex with you, doesn't want to talk to you, right? Was it really worth it? Was it just to prove a point that you're right and she's wrong? What's the point? And so, even for myself, when my husband says something that I don't agree with, I used to just naturally get into a debate with him. And now I kind of just stop and I'm like, okay, is what I'm about to share going to add to the conversation? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And a lot of times I'm just talking out of my ass. I just want to be right about it. And then I just stop and go, you know what? I'll just let him have it. Because honestly, this topic is not even important. And I just go, you're right, babe. And I keep my thought to myself. But it's about, for me, it's about choosing your battles, and also making sure that my husband knows that I appreciate him, that I respect him, that I value his thoughts and feelings. And when we do that, I get the same thing back. It's a very much a give and take thing. So I know we're over time, but can you give us, did we talk about, you did talk a little bit about advice and tips. So, in the last 2 minutes, how can you summarize, if there's anything that you want to leave with our viewers on this session, what is it that you want to leave with them?
The unfortunate reality is that we have now placed marriage on the bottom of the priority list.
Mm-hmm.
And what I ultimately do is I teach couples to reverse that. The most important thing in your life is that person that you sleep next to every night.
Yeah.
Not your car, not your house, not even your kids, slightly below. Not your friends, not your parents. The most important of your entire life is that person that you sleep next to every night.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to realize that. We need to reevaluate our priorities. In fact, one of the things that I realize that's going on because of the COVID, from a positive perspective, I agree, that those relationships that were shaky to begin with are now even worse because they have to spend more time together.
Yeah.
But the reality is for most of us, we're going to look back in hindsight after this virus situation is over, and we're going to realize that what the virus did was it really woke us up to what's important. It's not 12-hour a day, 7 days a week working until we get divorced mentality any longer. It's not chasing the almighty dollar at the expense of everything else in our life. Having nice things is great and everything, but the reality is your marriage is supposed to be your number one priority, and it's about time that we as a society remember that and reinvigorate that priority.
Yeah. I love what you said there, Tim, because you're right. We spend so much time managing our money, managing our health, making sure we eat, we put so much effort into all of these things. And yet the one thing that holds the glue together, that makes life worth living, is love and partnership.
Mhm.
And, I get the whole, wanting to be a provider and the protector, but if you're never there, none of having the nice house, having all the nice things, the nice toys for your kids, none of that matters when you're not there, you're not available, you're not present, and you're not connected.
Well, what you ultimately have to learn as an individual is this is the greatest question that we as an individual face. Why the hell are you on this planet? Why did God put you on this planet? I haven't balanced my checkbook since college. I don't work to make money. I make money because I work. And when you're doing what you love and when you're passionate about what you do, as they always say, you don't work a day in your life.
Mhm.
But when people are doing just the chasing the almighty dollar, they're miserable anyhow, because there's no pleasure in just the blatant abusive completely
Accumulation.
focused on
Yeah.
the almighty dollar at the expense of everything else. But people sacrifice the whole rest of their lives just to make money.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
so great, Tim. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this up. I love that you and I are aligned on so many things in this conversation. It made it so much easier. And
right.
I love that it's like, as a woman, there's times when I'm like, I think I know men. And, just being able to have that validated by the opposite sex, like, yeah, these are the challenges. And as I created the summit, I was kind of dealing with myself around, I'm like, who am I to be able to, give advice? But I mean, it's just so great hearing what you're saying. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you saw me, but I was like, I felt like my head was going to fall off because I was doing this so much.
But let me ask you, Janelle,
Yeah,
isn't it the ultimate experience being in a good marriage? Isn't
it
that
is.
just something that is completely indescribable, particularly for you, since you have the contrasting of your marriage, your startup marriage, or whatever you called it,
My practice marriage is what I
your
called it.
practice marriage, yeah. So just look at the
Yeah.
contrast, but just if other people could realize, because I know the kind of marriage that you have by the way you describe it, and think about, you're always going to have this kind of pride in your marriage because you got a great guy, he's got a great wife, you guys are growing together. And
Yeah.
that, to be honest with you, what I realize, what I understand about what I'm teaching, is you have discovered the mountaintop. You're not there yet. You will be there at the end of your days together. You guys, you're going to be a lot stronger 5 years from now than you are today, and a lot stronger 20 years from now than you are 5 years from now. And if you
Yeah.
can imagine how cool your marriage is now, and as long as you continue down the same path that you're on, how much better and stronger and more passionate your marriage is going to be down the road. That is the mountaintop, or the holy grail, or whatever mythological symbolism you want to explain about the ultimate quest in life,
Yeah.
is the marriage that you have.
Absolutely. I thank God every single day. I am clear that He is the greatest gift that I've ever received.
It's a
There's
gift from
nothing.
God. It's
Yeah,
absolutely a gift from God.
absolutely. I'm just like, well, I don't know what I did right in this lifetime, but I mean, I won the lottery. I tell you, as you can imagine, I know we're going overtime, but I don't care. This summit has been a lot of work for me. I've been slaving. I haven't had a day off in 3 months, and this man has let me do my thing. He doesn't bother me. He cooks, he cleans, he makes sure that I take a shower. He's concerned about me. He reminds me of how proud of me he is. And he gives me the space to do what I need to do. He doesn't complain that I'm in my office 12 hours a day. And when I come out, he's there with open arms and just reminding me of how awesome I am and how beautiful I am and how wanted I am, how sexy I am. And it's not even like it's a ton of work. It's just like really being okay with expressing love, always having respect and serving each other. We're great servers of each other. We know each other's love language so well that we speak it on a minute by minute basis. And so whatever comes our way, whatever we're dealing with, whether it's personally or like as a couple, we just have such a level of appreciation and respect for each other, because we know that, especially with this whole COVID thing, we know that life can be over in an instant and we never know how much time we have to be together. And so we just relish in that partnership and in that fun and silliness and just like being best friends. Like I don't know how else to describe it, but I can tell you that, this is someone that I would never change anything about him. And to me, he's everything that I need to to want to grow as a human being. Like, he makes me want to be a better person.
Exactly.
He teaches. Yeah,
But behind every successful person is a supportive spouse.
absolutely. You know,
One
and
of the
so
things
go
One of
ahead.
the things I find interesting about couples is those that don't really support each other, and that's a common problem. But said conversely is what you just said. Successful marriages are also about supporting each other,
Yeah.
because the reality is 1 plus 1 is a lot more than 2. You guys together as a team can do so much more than just putting the two of you as individuals together as a
Mm,
partnership.
mm,
And it's so beautiful when it's working. And that's what we need to teach other people to do, is
yeah.
how to create a marriage where they're supportive of each other.
Yeah.
There is so much value in having a spouse support you, as opposed to the other way around going, when are you coming to bed? What are you doing? You spent how many hours on this yesterday? What are you doing this for? And if you
Mhm.
think about the other way that he could have been in what this project you've been working on for the last 3 months, if he would have been needling you, you know how much more difficult it would have been for you to put this summit on if he was not supportive?
It probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
would have felt like a terrible human being
Right.
and would have been like, it's not worth it. And I would have given up. And I see that all the time, that women
Mhm.
don't are so desperate because they have a dream and their spouse just doesn't support them. And it means everything to them
Mhm.
to make it or break it. So
And
anyway,
it goes both ways too. Men need
absolutely.
supportive wives, and women need supportive husbands. They both need support of each other. But again, that's what a partnership is by definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is you
Yeah.
have your assets, your partner has his or her assets, and if your partner's supporting you, your assets get to improve. Remember, the mind isn't stagnant; it's either growing or shrinking. And if you have
Yeah.
these skills and your partner is supporting you, then your skills are going to improve because you're not constrained. Here's the way I look at this. I know we're getting late, but here's the way I look at this. Okay, when you think of the word equality, what one word comes to mind when you think of the word equality?
Same.
Freedom.
Mm,
Freedom. Think about slavery, the
mm,
whole riot, the protest that's going on with the whole Black Lives Matters thing. You think about women voting. You think about all the things that we've done in the last 200 years in this country in this fight for equality. What this
mhm,
fight for equality is the freedom to become an
mm.
individual. And so when you base your marriage based on equality, it means freedom for both in the marriage. So what does inequality mean? No freedom.
Mhm,
And so the choices that you have in your marriage is equality or control.
mhm.
Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. It's one of the
Mhm,
most calming sayings that I've discovered, as far as if you
mhm.
can just let your mind go. Now, if you have all the anxiety of your past that you haven't come to terms with, that's not possible to do,
Sure.
because if the anxiety still exists, you can't repress that anxiety. You have to address it. But the reward you get for overcoming your past is being able to look at your partner as an equal. And when
Mhm.
you look at your partner as an equal, not one trying to control the other, what that means, as far as having a calm, peaceful, beautiful marriage, is exactly what you have.
Mhm. Thank
Because you
you.
guys have a marriage based on equality.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much, Tim. Now, do you have something that we can share with our viewers that would make a big difference in this realm or in this area?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm offering. If you're asking what I can help people to help them improve there, I've got, and I know you're going to be posting this, but I've got a free 2 hour seminar
Mm,
that I offer to people. There is a caveat, and that caveat is that both have to attend. Doesn't do any good if one wants to improve the marriage but the other doesn't, because it's so much more challenging if one's not interested. If
mhm,
people want to reach out to me, my email address is my name, Tim Kellis, Timkellis, at Happy Relationships, and relationships is plural.
mhm,
So Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. And I've actually created on Facebook it's called the Marriage Support Group. So if you go search on Facebook the marriage support group. It's a picture of a couple kissing. That's my marriage support group that I've created on Facebook as a safe and private place for people to gather to learn ways of improving their marriage.
Great. And what is your seminar? What's your 2-hour seminar called?
The Marriage Solution Seminar.
The Marriage Solution. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah. I mean, this, I've this notion of solving the marriage problem. And now that you've heard me speak and your listeners are hearing this, I've solved the marriage problem. If I can teach people what I understand about marriage, they're going to stay married together. And all I'm doing is I'm eliminating arguments from marriage. Every couple I work with, in fact, I've got testimonials online. You go look at my testimonials, and every one of those testimonials say the same thing. We no longer argue after working with Tim.
Awesome.
So all I'm doing is I'm eliminating argument. Imagine for a second, now you don't, because you don't argue with your husband, but anybody listening to this presentation, just close your eyes for a second. Just imagine for a second that you no longer argue in your marriage. And imagine in fact, I will tell you though, I've posted this before on my group, and I've had people respond. What I'll post is, what would your marriage be like if you no longer argue? And some of the responses that I get is somebody will put boring. And when I'm psychoanalyzing that statement, what I realize is that people find pleasure in being miserable. And people think that arguments are a way to spice up the marriage.
Yeah. It's like breakup. It's kind of like breakup sex.
Well, of course
right?
it is. It's, or makeup sex, or makeup
sex.
Okay, but and asking you, Janelle, and you just explained it. Is your marriage boring, or is it the most wonderful thing you've ever experienced because you guys get along?
Yeah, definitely not boring.
That's what I mean.
Everything together. It's so fun.
Exactly. It's not boring when you no longer argue. But people that think that arguments are, for one thing, nobody's yet, except for this message. There's no other message that you'll find anywhere that's telling people that arguments shouldn't be part of a marriage. Yeah, so we are taught what?
I get it all the time. They're like, that's not healthy that you guys don't. You guys have to be arguing. I'm like, do we? I don't know. We just don't. I mean, it's
well, there's nobody out there with the message. This is what I'm doing here is I'm bringing this message to the public on how psychologically damaging arguments are. Dr. Phil, in the quote in his relationship book, in the 25 years I've been doing work in the field of human behavior, I've seen few, if any, genuine relationship conflicts ever get solved. That is a direct quote from Dr. Phil's book. And what he's basically saying is he's not solved a single problem in 25 years of marriage therapy. And that's what you get when you go through this traditional psychology world where, they say everybody argues. They don't even address the issue of arguments. They basically, I know you said your love languages, even the 5 love languages. If you're going to argue, the 5 love languages is not going to stop you from arguing. You're still not going to get along.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nobody out there yet that's put a message out in the public domain that shows you that arguments are not supposed to be part of the marriage. Yeah. And that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. So great, Tim. Thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure.
The last 51 minutes have been incredible. I got so much. I took a lot of notes. I will include your Tim's 2-hour seminar in the follow-up email, so please watch for that. Thank you again, Tim, for being with me. And I know it's late, so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
And thank you so much, Janelle, for letting me come on. I know I was a last-minute addition, so letting me come on and be a contributing member to this wonderful summit. And as you and I talked about when we first spoke, I hope this isn't the last one.
Yeah, no, I'm already thinking about the next one. So thank you for putting that in my ear.
No worries at all.
All right, take care.
You too. Thanks, Janelle.
Bye for now.